Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about another English astrology book, this one from the 19th century. I'm going to hold it up to the camera so you can see. It's called Zadkiel Legacy. See, it's rather a small book, very, very slim. And the title page is here. Once again, we have a bit of a problem with the bright sunlight. I'll read it out in full. Zadkiel Legacy, containing a full and particular judgment on the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter on the 26th of January 1842, being their most important conjunction since the days of King Alfred the Great, foreshowing the history of the world for 200 years to come. Also, essays on Hindu astrology and the nativity of H.R.H. Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, his character and future destiny, etc. London, Sherwood & Co., Paternoster Row, 1842. He begins with a preface in which he almost theatrically talks about how his book is going to endure. Many generations shall pass by, many centuries roll away, and this book shall still remain a memento of the sublime powers of astral influence. For lo, I have commenced it at the moment of Mercury scything, on this present first day of September, in the year of grace 1840, when fixed signs did occupy the angles of the heavenly scheme, the moon and lord of the sign ascending being also in fixed signs, 5 planets angular, the lord of the ascendant in the 9th or house of science, and the moon, while ruling that house, being situate in the ascendant in sextile to the glorious Sol, ruler of the 10th or house of fame, and apply into a close conjunction of the bounteous and benefic Jupiter. Moreover, Mercury on the cusp of the 10th is in reception of the Sun, Caput Draconis is in the 4th, and the lord of the ascendant in trine aspect to the ruler of that house, which governs the end of the matter. The enemies of truth, the foes of astral doctrines, will never prevail against it, and this book shall be quoted in proof of the solemn realities of the great philosophy of the heavens, long after its present puny foes have been forgotten, long after the present and the coming centuries are remembered only through the page of history, and thought of only by those who scan the dim vista of bygone ages. Thus, much in anticipation of this, the most cherished endeavour to enlighten mankind, which has occupied the mind for many years of their friend and brother, who in writing Zadkiel Legacy hopes that he will not call in vain to the world to awake from their dream of selfish and unworthy pursuits of wealth and pleasure, to the contemplation of the beauties of truth and holiness, and to the practice of that brotherly love which Jesus came to teach, and for the increase of which all good men daily pray, as does ever the friend of all nations, the lover of all that is human, Zadkiel the Seer. So that was written in 1840, September 1840, but the book was actually published in 1842. Now this book essentially draws on quite an old tradition of historical astrology, which goes back at least to the Arabic astrologers. One of the most famous works on this subject is De Magnis Conjunctionibus, on the great conjunctions, and that being a work by Abu Mashar, which has been edited and published quite recently by Keiji Yamamoto and Charles Burnett in a 2-volume edition, of which this is the first. Now, Burnett and Yamamoto give some quite interesting historical details about the sources that Abu Mashar himself drew on, and they point out that there were earlier references to the use of Saturn and Jupiter conjunctions in historical astrology in the work of Omar of Tiberias and Masha Allah. Now I do apologise, I can't pronounce Arabic because I've never learned it, so my pronunciation may be quite incorrect, but bear with me please. Also, Lynn Thorndike notes in his History of Magic and Experimental Science that there was a shorter work by Al Kindi, who was a teacher to Abu Mashar, also on the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn, which was apparently edited in the 19th century in a rather obscure volume, which is available through print on demand these days. But one of the features of these ideas that go back to the Arabs is this idea of the great conjunctions and what's called the Great Mutation of Jupiter and Saturn. Now the idea is that once every so many years, according to the Arabs it was once every 960 years, and this is the same figure that Zadkiel has used, although in fact the work of my esteemed colleague Richard Noller at his website astropro.com shows that the nearer truth is approximately once every 800 years, and this is the distance between conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn at the same point in the zodiac. There is a recurring cycle of 800 years, during which time the cycle of conjunctions in various different parts of the zodiac is undertaken, and it then repeats every 800 years. Now, one of the curious features of this cycle is that there tends to be a grouping of conjunctions in particular elements lasting roughly 200 years each. And when Zadkiel was writing this work, he was referring to the starting of a new series of these conjunctions in the Earth element, which he says to have begun on January the 26th, 1842. When I look in detail at the data that Richard Noller has compiled, it's clear that this wasn't actually the very first of the current cycle of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in this element. The first one was on July the 17th, 1802, but that was followed by another one in the previous fire element series. And Richard Noller's principle is that you have to have at least 2 or 3 in a row in the same element for it to mark the start of a new series. And on that basis, the date used by Richard Morrison, by Zadkiel, of January the 26th, 1842 for the start of the Earth series in this instance was correct. If I look back through the data that Richard Noller has compiled, it's clear that the previous Earth series began on November the 18th, 1047, which is almost exactly 800 years previously. There was then an air series beginning on March the 5th, I think I've written 1226 here, I'm sorry, my own writing is rather poor, and then a water series on August the 26th, 1425. However, the water series is peculiar because it's mostly water, but there are some earth conjunctions mixed in. So you get this mixture of water and earth, and then it goes back to fire on December the 18th, 1603, and to earth on January the 26th, 1842, and we get an air series starting properly on December the 21st, 2020, although there was a single air conjunction on December the 31st, 1980, and so on. So you can see roughly every 200 years this series of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions moves into a new element, and every 800 years it repeats. What Morrison does in this book is to take the exact moment of the entry of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction into the earthy element, as he defines it, on 26th of January 1842, and delineate the indications for the next couple of 100 years according to the houses at that point. he sets the scheme of the heavens for an ascendant in London in order to primarily see what is going to happen in English history during the course of this next 200-year period. But he then also briefly at the end discusses indications for India and even Mexico. Among the predictions which Zadkiel makes in this book are that England is going to run into trouble with Portugal over that period of 200 years. He also predicts great trouble with Libya and Afghanistan, as well as in India. He predicts that the people are going to rise up and overthrow the English rule, which of course has happened since that time and during the period of the earthy conjunctions that began in 1842. So some of his predictions appear to have been accurate, but I'm not so sure when it comes to Portugal. That's something which perhaps is necessary to check looking through the history of the last couple of 100 years, but to the best of my awareness, Portugal hasn't been a particular enemy of England since 1842. Nonetheless, in terms of method, this is historically interesting because Zadkiel was using methods which had been popularized by the Arabs in the Middle Ages, and he is basically very confidently holding forth that these methods are still relevant to making mundane predictions for countries today. At the very end of the book, there is a brief section on Hindu astronomy and astrology, and he mentions the Hindu decans from a work by Varaha Mihira. I think it's the Brihat Samhita, but I'm not sure. And finally, he does delineate the nativity of an English prince who had recently been born, and he relies heavily on the writing of Ptolemy for that purpose. That was all I had to talk about today. I hope that was interesting. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.